All right, I'm Kristen Monroe. I'm the founding director of the UCI Interdisciplinary Center for the Scientific Study of Ethics and Morality, otherwise known affectionately as the Ethics Center. And this is the wrap-up of our 2022 Summer Mentoring Program, where we have some wonderful students. We have about 300 this year, and I want to acknowledge each of the students who's working with us. I want to begin with Andrada Kostu, because Andrada is the associate director for the summer program, and she's the one who organized all of this, kind of runs it despite the interference of the faculty, I think. And then Kian, I want to thank you for doing your program. Jessica's doing 2, which is very great. Ben is doing 1, and Monica is also doing 2. So I want to go ahead and we want to have the kids have a chance to present their findings for things. I'm going to go first, if that's okay, only because there were a couple of my kids who have 1:30 appointments. And so I'm going to ask everybody to go through reasonably quickly, taking up to about 10 minutes for each module, because we do have 9 modules. Jessica, I don't know if you've combined your 2, but we're recording this. We have someone from JZ Productions who will be editing it and putting it up on the website. And so you should feel free to show it to people. But I just want to thank all the students. This was every year, it's like they get better students. I don't know what we're doing, but it's such a pleasure. It's a joy to work with these kids and to see them develop and grow. And I expect great things from all of them. And I really want to thank them for giving us the opportunity to teach them. And I know I speak for all the mentors. So thank you to all the mentors, and thank you to all the students. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Alexis. Kim, I think you were the one that was kind of organizing things. So why don't you take charge for the group here?
Yeah, so this module was led by Professor Monroe, and we broadly explored moral courage through kind of 3 different avenues. First one was through a paper presented at the ISPP conference on Thomas More and Martin Luther. So a couple of our students are going to present on that right now.
Hello, where's the More? Daniel?
Yes, 1 second. Do I have screen sharing capabilities or?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Can you guys see that?
This was an example of moral courage when you don't necessarily share the values of the people. We wanted to know whether or not moral courage can exist outside the parameters of liberal, democratic, humanistic society.
All right, so we're going to start with Martin Luther, then we're going to go into Thomas More really briefly.
Hey, everyone. We worked a little bit on finding the moral courage in Martin Luther's work and actions. So one of his first actions of moral courage is he became a monk despite, his difficulties and challenges proposed by his family. But he felt that he had to keep his promise and then just able to find the truth. His second moral courage actions, and probably one of the most important one, is 95 Theses, one of his most famous achievements. So they committed to the idea that salvation could be reached through faith and grace only. Despite facing challenges proposed by the church, he criticized the corruption of selling indulgences. And then one of the third moral courage action that he had is he defended his own believings, even though he was sent to court and then had a very intense debate with the church. He didn't let back down, and then he didn't give up with the thing that he believed in. And but when he was excommunicated, he actually translated the New Testament into German language. So it gives like ordinary people the opportunity to read God's word. Then yeah, it just shows that like no matter how difficult the situation gets, Luther never just gave up on what he believed in.
All right, cool. So this is Thomas More. Both of these acts of moral courage had to do with religion. So in Thomas More's case, first of all, some background. He was a lawyer, a judge. He was a philosopher who wrote the book Utopia, which is his best known work, and a statesman. And he served as the Lord High Chancellor under Henry VIII. So what the act of moral courage was that he refused to take the oath that basically said Henry VIII is the legitimate head of the Church of England. And in this age where it was, the divine right of kings, going against the King of England is a very, very big deal. And it could lead to very big consequences for someone, which in Thomas More's case was him being sentenced to death and eventually being executed. So Thomas More did this, and this was considered morally courageous because of his identity and his values, right? Thomas More was a devout Catholic, and he stood up for what he believed in staunchly because of his free speech values as well. So when someone came along like Henry VIII and tried to create their own church, he did not stand for that and refused to take an oath, regardless of how much he served Henry VIII as a political figure and not as a religious one. But so this was an act of moral courage, but not in the sense of what you typically see in humanistic societies, because there was no empathy towards other people involved, but rather it was just a act solely on principle and what he believed in, which is basically what you can expect from a wealthy philosopher. Other people did not play a role in his decision making, and he was well aware of the risks, thus making it overwhelmingly an act of moral courage. All right, that's what we have for England.
Alexis?
Yeah, and then now we're going to do our presentation on another paper we wrote on the Third Reich, basically exploring moral courage in societies that we find morally repugnant. There we go. Okay, and then, so the first Nazi that we explored was Franz Strangl. Okay. Sorry, the presentation is glitching out a little bit. Okay, there we go. Franz Strangl was the commandant of the Treblinka death camp, and he actually made the death camp much more efficient. But through his actions, he displayed a lack of personal accountability and self-efficacy. So a famous quote attributed to him was, "This was the system. Worth had invented it. It worked, and because it worked, it was irreversible." Again, it shows that he had little belief that he was able to change the system, and he didn't hold himself personally accountable for those deaths that he contributed to. He blamed the system. He also displayed a lack of respect for human life. So another quote was, "When I was on a trip once, years later in Brazil, my train stopped next to a slaughterhouse. The cattle in the pens, hearing the noise of the train, trotted up to the fence and stared at the train. I thought then, look at this. This reminds me of Poland. Just how the people looked trustingly just before they were put in tins." And then another very famous quote was, "Cargo. They were cargo." In both of these quotes, he's attributing Jewish people who he killed to objects and not human lives, showing that he, again, doesn't have any respect for human life. After World War II was over, he escaped to Brazil. Later, he was captured, and when he was in prison, he was interviewed by Gita Sereni, which is where all these quotes came from. And our ultimate conclusion was that he did not display traits that are associated with moral courage.
Okay, so the next person is Albert Speer, and Albert Speer was a, next slide. He was part of Hitler's inner circle. He was also Hitler's chief architect. He was also the Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production. So his act of moral courage was that he insisted he had no knowledge of Hitler's end goal or final solution where he killed all the Jews. So by saying that, he evaded the death sentence and only got 20 years in prison instead. He portrayed himself as innocent and only seduced by Hitler, but he also admitted in a quote that he didn't try to stop Hitler because he and his colleagues were kind of brainwashed. So he also showed core values of helping others. So he basically talked about like when someone's injured, it's a human obligation to try to help them. So it shows that he did show empathy for human beings. Did he ultimately display moral courage? Well, he did display some core values such as empathy. He did acknowledge his mistakes later on after he was in prison. He was like, what I did was wrong. However, he was still part of the inner circle and even admitted to, understanding what Hitler did, but still not stopping him. And then next one is William Sukart. So he was a lawyer and bureaucrat by profession, and he drafted the anti-Semitic Nuremberg laws, the final solution at the Wannsee Conference, and also developed an euthanization program for Down syndrome kids. His act of moral courage was that instead of following Hitler's orders of murdering mixed-race people, Sukart proposed forced sterilization instead. But he did that not because he wanted to save lives, but because murdering these people would create endless administrative work. So he basically didn't murder them because he was selfish and he didn't want to take on the extra work. So what we can see here is that rather than acting out of morals of society, he acted out of his own set of beliefs. For example, he euthanized his own son with Down syndrome, and he didn't make an exception for him. So which shows that he really believed in the programs that he was creating. So he didn't display core values, key values, or moral muscles, but did he ultimately display moral courage? Well, he did disobey Hitler, but not because of morals shown in liberal democratic humanistic societies, but because he was a bureaucrat who served the Nazi party. And that's it.
Yeah, and our last group is going to present on rogue Republicans. So take it away.
Rock, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm just going ahead and trying to get the screen share. Just give me 1 second here. But until I get that done, I guess I can just kind of just talk off myself. So essentially what rogue republicanism is when you're looking into Republicans, or for people who don't know, is basically when you're looking into Republicans who have gone from being hardcore conservatives and who have their entire life been involved in the Republican Party and that type of political realm to transitioning, especially following the recent election of Donald Trump in 2016, and now even over the past election cycle, and no longer affiliate with the party. So we actually just got off of our interview, like Professor Monroe earlier said when we got on this call, with Rick Wilson, who is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. And the Lincoln Project really has been running ads. It's been advocating against the re-election of Trump for the 2020 election, potentially even 2024. And then also it worked against for the Senate, and for those Republicans running for the Senate. He actually had a lot of interesting things to say about that, about loyalty to the party. And really a quote that kind of a couple that just stuck with me were, mockery is the kryptonite to evil. And he said that it really, the Republicanism causes a hole that is never filled. And really it's just, and he really just stated that there's this fear that the Trump administration put in people of losing the election and losing their lives as a result. So it was just really interesting insight into rogue republicanism and the motivations behind that and how that relates to people's moral courage.
Yeah, physical fear as well as other things. All right. I want to thank everybody in Module 5 and move on to Module 1 now. Jessica, thank you.
Sorry, everyone. I will share my screen right now. Sorry. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We had such a great time. Sorry, I just finished this last image right there. We had such a great time, and I am so happy to share with you what we were doing. So let me get that together. All right, I haven't presented on PowerPoint. I've always been using Google Slides, so it's been a while for this. Let's see, slideshow, play from the start. All right, here we go. So this was our module. We were looking at science and moral reflection. So we were looking at the intersection of, so you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my share real quick. I should have done this at the beginning. I'm going to make sure that we have transcripts available for everyone. So that you can turn them off if you like. Someone should have gotten the notification for that. Andrada, did you get that? Perfect. Thank you. Beautiful. All right. Now hide the subtitles. Okay, we're ready to go. Sorry. Let's do this. All right. So my name is Jessica Gonzalez, and I'm a graduate student, PhD candidate in the Department of Logic and Philosophy of Science. And so our module was all about the intersection of science and moral reflection, or really the science and morality. And so the intern, so we went through this question about can science help us make better decisions? And that was our goal, but it was really inclusive. So a lot of interns also decided to research topics just within that general intersection of how science and morality come together. So we got lots of interesting ideas going around and lots of interesting studies, and it was just a really fun time. So the question that we were asking though, right? So was about how we can use science to contribute to our moral decisions. And so here we go. What our interns did in these modules. So there were two sections, but we were covering the same topics and we had the same goals. So each week we had article analyses and a reflection. So all of the interns looked at scientific articles and wrote up analyses of them. And they also did reflections so that they could put their own thoughts together and really push themselves to think about the topics that we were covering. All right. And then their final project was something we were calling a white paper. So in business, from what I understand, I've never done this before. So this was new, but I think that it worked. I know it worked because we saw everyone's projects yesterday. In business, when you want to advertise or share your ideas in a real concrete way, oftentimes people will make these white papers. And so the idea is that they're supposed to be a good tool of communication. So we were kind of putting an academic spin on it. And so our interns all created their own white papers, and some of them were really visually appealing. And the idea behind them is that they should be something that's meaningful to them and that they could hand to a family member or a friend, and that family member or friend could get a real good picture of what they were doing during the internship. So here are the topics that we covered. We asked, what is the relationship between science and morality? So we started off a bit philosophical and looked at just what it means to look at this intersection of the two, because a lot of people think of science and morality and think, how are those connected? They seem like different things, but as we saw, they are not. Then we asked whether science can help us feel better about our past moral decisions. And so we looked at the science behind how we make moral judgments and how our brains deal with moral dilemmas. And this brought us into a topic called trolleyology, which is a really fun sort of thing to talk about. And you can Google that if you're interested in it. I'll kind of leave that as a teaser. And then we asked whether science can help us make better moral decisions in the present or in the future. And for that, we looked at moral reasoning and moral dumbfounding, and looked at how people oftentimes aren't using their moral reasoning when they're coming to moral judgments. It's oftentimes just an emotional response. And then finally, we looked at what concrete changes science can help us make in our moral decisions. And for that, we looked at science as a tool for moral reflection. So we looked at whether we can use science to make practical changes to our moral deliberations. So for the rest of my time, I'm going to defer to some of our interns. Many of our interns made little videos. I wasn't able to include all of them for this, but I'm really grateful to all of them for contributing those. So I just picked a few and I'm going to play those now.
Hi, I'm Sayang, and I hate to admit it, but I never really thought much about the term morality before joining this program. It was kind of an abstract concept for me, something for the philosophers to theorize about. But I soon learned that morality and our underlying cognitive processes that influence our moral behaviors can be broken down and understood through science. In our modules, we talked about how we make moral judgments and which factors influence this. And therefore, we were given tools to critically reflect upon our own thoughts, values, and actions to get rid of the blind spots that we have towards ourselves and hopefully change ourselves for the better. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Hi, my name is Sasha, and throughout this class, I have been learning how to determine whether science can help us make more educated moral decisions. And in conclusion, I believe that that is a true fact. I've done a whole bunch of research on stuff like, for example, how schizophrenia can impair our moral decision making, or how when we're trying to make moral decisions, we could be impulsive, or even how relationships could hinder our ability to make unbiased moral decisions. And I believe that if we are able to understand our ability to process these moral decisions and how our mind creates such biases, that we'll be able to essentially create more educated and better decisions with the help of science. And yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Sienna, and throughout this internship, I have gained a deeper understanding about the science behind our decisions and more. We have discussed many different papers and readings, and we have learned about the different ways that we can make decisions, as well as how that correlates to our brain. We also discussed moral dilemmas and how they impact us, as well as why we might make certain decisions when we are placed into those moral dilemmas. This module has allowed me to understand the relationship between science and philosophy, and has developed a further passion for ethics and science. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ryan, and I found this internship with Ms. Gonzalez and my peers to be a very interesting and valuable experience. Every week, we read about and discussed really thought-provoking topics regarding the workings behind our intuition and judgments. I was particularly fascinated by how truly connected science is to the study of morality, and how by using scientific studies and research, we're able to learn a lot more about what drives us to think and act the way we do, which can tell us a lot about ourselves that we didn't even know. And I'm very glad that I was able to personally research scientific studies with significant and impactful findings. The study of morality in the medical field really piqued my interest. And so from my article analyses and white paper, I looked into studies that research moral issues, judgments, and biases in medical care. Overall, I am very grateful to Ms. Gonzalez for her guidance, and I'm looking forward to seeing where this new knowledge takes me. Thank you.
I found this class so exciting, I think mostly because it's so different than the regular subjects I'm used to learning in school. And I think it was just a great way to be able to branch out and learn more about topics related to ethics, morality, and sociology. But I think my main takeaway was that there's always a why to everything. And I think that from this class, I'm definitely going to be finding myself asking why I'm acting a certain way and why the people around me are reacting a certain way. And I think it's just one of those things that's now just going to be in the back of my mind, kind of wondering why everyone's acting the way they are. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kevin. As someone who had a lot of background with STEM activities, but is also interested in history and societal problems, I have learned a ton of fascinating and important topics that I have never heard about before from CM Module 1B. Use a scientific method to empirically study moral and ethical issues that seem to me the perfect combination of STEM and humanities. And what we learn from the results about the processes that lead to biased judgments and the way we make decisions during dilemma situations will be valuable for people to make more informed and considered decisions. For example, personally, learning about topics such as moral intuition has let me question the biases in my own decision-making process, specifically how I'm usually guided by intuitions and emotions rather than my actual reasoning. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Naomi, and I really enjoyed doing this module with Ms. Gonzalez because I got to learn about the science behind why we do what we do, and this helped simplify morality a lot for me because before that, there's always like this vague abstract concept. I also got to improve my academic paper reading skills because we had to do a bunch of weekly reflections and analysis papers, and so because of that, I can now sort of skim through all that scientific jargon to find the relevant information. And overall, Ms. Gonzalez is just someone that's really nice and understanding. So I always felt free to discuss my opinions. And I met a bunch of really cool people that have different perspectives on things. So I'd say that this was just a very fun module experience and definitely a summer that was well spent.
Hi, my name is Dylan Planty. I was in Module 1. And one thing that I learned from this internship was about trolleyology. I think that's how you say it. But I found that super fascinating because, in both scenarios where one, you're shoving someone off a bridge to save 5 people, a lot of people wouldn't do that, but they would switch the train track and switch the trolley to save the one person or save the 5 people and kill the one person. So that was one thing that I found that was pretty cool.
Over the course of this internship, I learned a lot about the relationship between science and morality. Each week, we explored a different topic in morality to answer the question, how can science help us make better moral decisions? Some of the topics included moral dumbfounding, moral dilemmas, social intuitionism, and cognitive biases. I found this program particularly fascinating because it was interesting to learn about the reasonings behind people's decisions and behaviors, and fascinating to see how they justify it. For my white paper specifically, I explored the presence of cognitive biases in medicine, and it allowed me to gain a greater understanding of the importance of studying morality and science, and how we can attempt to combat such biases and improve the quality of our healthcare.
During this internship with Ms. Gonzalez, I've learned a lot, and some things were contrary to what I expected normally, because when people hear science, just like me, I expect something very physical, something that's happening actively. But actually, our thinking and our mental processes are also what's making this moral and science kind of support each other, where morals is made up of moral reasoning, judgment, so many little tiny parts that makes up our morals itself. Morals doesn't seem like something at first that can be improved, that can be benefited, that can be kind of be worsened, but science sort of has shown that. And it's really interesting because this internship started out every week with like a philosopher as the main focus, and each philosopher had different ideas that improved upon the past moral beliefs. And that was really interesting to see every week, to see how, as humans developed, science developed, and science helped back up our evolution for our moral development.
Hello, my name is Sienna, and one thing that I found very interesting about this internship was getting to learn about John Green's study of moral cognition, because I used to watch a show called The Good Place on Netflix, and it dealt a lot with philosophical reasoning and morality and ethics, and I always found it very interesting. And I even think the trolley problem or dilemma was brought up in the show. And I am very grateful that I've gotten to learn about subjective thinking and objective thinking and how that plays into morality, because I feel like in the future, I'll be able to recognize it more when dealing with moral dilemmas. And I've even noticed now that I'm trying to see what kind of thinker I am in certain situations.
All right, that's all we have. So thank you all for, special shout out to all of my interns, and we had such a great time. I'm so thankful to them for all of the participation and contributions that they made. And thank you all for watching my videos.
Thank you, Jessica. I think maybe we should turn the captioning on because I had a little difficulty understanding some of the videos that were shown.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is it not happening live on yours?
I didn't see any videos. Did anybody else see any captioning?
My captioning is on, but I don't know how it came on. I can't even see it now.
I think you have to actually press the CC live transcript button on the bottom of the Zoom bar, or the bottom of the Zoom screen. So if you have it in full screen, if you drag your cursor to the bottom of the screen and make the thing appear, then you can hit CC live transcript and it'll let you turn it off or turn it on.
Thank you, Ben. I just did it. Thank you. That's great. Okay. So I hope it came on the one that was recorded. That's terrific. Okay. I think next one up would be Andrada.
Yes, I would love to talk about the first module that I was leading this summer. I taught 3 modules, module 3, 7, and 8. So now I'm going to talk about the pseudoscience of race, which was module number 2. This was a wonderful experience for me, and I hope it was the same for all the students. There was a lot to take in this module. We started our journey of learning about race with the scientific invention of race. Then we moved to the eugenics movement. And then we discussed many other interesting issues that stimulated our critical thinking about how we socially categorized, about how race is and was socially constructed, and about how we can move forward and align our societies to respect social justice and racial justice. So I want to take all of my students. They have done an outstanding job, really amazing. They blew my mind with their movie presentations. And yes, we have watched some movies, not within the module, but outside the module. And then they have done some movie presentations. And I hope we can share these PowerPoints with you because I thought they were really amazing. I don't know if there will be any infringements, but we will discuss that and we will see if we can post them on the website. And I will let them speak because we recorded a presentation as well. So I'm going to share my screen and I will let them tell you what they have learned in this module. And I hope I'm sharing my presentation right.
Yes, you are.
Screen.
Yes.
Okay, and let me go here and let's see. Okay, this was started.
This meeting is. So Module 2 is the pseudoscience of race and ethnicity, the impact of social categorization on public policy that reflects and perpetuates systemic racism.
Can
the
you
introduction
see
and general
student's
overview.
Picture in the right left corner. Are you able to see that?
We can see her, yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Module 2 focused on the pseudoscience of race and ethnicity, and this is what we studied each week to enhance our understanding of each topic. For week 1, we focused on the scientific invention of race, eugenics, and U.S. immigration policy. Through a lecture and multiple discussions, we learned the history of race science and social Darwinism, eugenics around the world, more specifically Nazi and American eugenics, and the 1924 immigration law. We learned the beginnings of racism and how eugenics began because of social Darwinism, which justified why the European race is superior.
In week 2 of this module, we discussed the similarities and differences between the formation of racism and implicit bias. Similarly to racism, implicit bias leads to discrimination, as implicit bias will cause a person to draw conclusions or generalizations about a group. However, implicit bias is different than racism, as it is formed without one's awareness, while racism is explicit discrimination that our brain isn't wired to do.
In week 3, we studied systemic racism and the legacy of slavery. By studying 5 different movies that focused on systemic racism, each group created a presentation showcasing the type of racism found in the movie, its significance, and what lessons they took away from it. By sharing these presentations, the class became aware of many different aspects of racism, including code switching, biases, and discrimination and success. And then in week 4, as a class, we came together to create not only this presentation, but also a group paper that focuses on our discussion of cognitive errors and biases, systemic racism and how it's displayed in the criminal justice system, and how race obstructs Black mobility and opportunity.
The key ideas of race science emerged through early European thinkers during the Enlightenment era to begin examining humans and society. Advancements were also made in political and philosophical thought, such as the idea that all men were equal and entitled to certain freedoms, though, of course, this did not apply to everyone. Professor Petrus Camper and anthropologist Samuel Morton used scientific theories such as studying human aesthetic perfection and skull anatomy and brain size to prove that people with lighter skin were superior. Different methods such as slavery and the caste system were used in order to continue justifying racial order in society.
Social Darwinism gave rise to ideologies of European superiority. It applied principles of natural selection and survival of the fittest to human societies. It promoted the idea that certain groups and races were superior or more fit than others. And social Darwinism was a type of thinking that justified these scientific thoughts about race. Even in the late 1800s to 1900s, people still believed slavery was for the good of humanity and allowed racist, degrading, and inhumane actions.
So here's the emergence of the ethnic and racial hierarchies. After Spanish colonizers had settled in the Americas and developed cash crop plantations, natives and later peoples from Africa and Caribbean would be enslaved and used as a new labor force. Hiring Spanish officials were mostly men, and after settling, many unmarried native women. This is how the emergence of the first mixed race group of peoples, the mestizos, whom were their children.
So to continue to ensure that there was still a system in place that favored white European or the masters over their slaves and the native peoples, one of the first social hierarchy systems that was based on race would then develop, and it was known as the casta system. And how it was measured was that each drop of one's white European Spanish blood would set them closer to the top, and the pure Spanish, or those who were born to two Spanish parents, were given top ranking, while the natives born to native parents and the enslaved were cast at the bottom.
Our slides on implicit bias. Implicit bias is an unintentional bias that affects our thoughts, words, and actions. And implicit bias can cause unwanted stereotypes and thoughts toward others.
The extension of implicit bias, explicit bias, or racism, and there really is no objective line where one ends, the other begins. It's unavoidable that humans develop these biases based on what they've experienced, and with implicit bias, these biases are developed and act unconsciously. However, when some of this unconscious thought spills into conscious thought, for example, if one were to start making generalizations about ethnic groups, that racism really starts to develop. There are plenty of ways to combat implicit bias and its effects, one of which being ensuring ethnic diversity in the workplace, which not only thwarts job recruitment bias, but naturally minimizes the development of biases from an ethnic or gender-based standpoint, simply because you're being exposed to more diverse groups of people. Implicit bias also plays a major role in systemic discrimination, a good example of which were the loan biases in the 1930s that perpetuated up until now, leaving African Americans permanently in a state of being left behind. Even when race is not a consideration anymore, the socioeconomic impact of the 1930s lead to the same patterns reoccurring, hence the positive feedback.
These generalizations have had a heavy place in the media and are often spread through movies. Generalizations that portray a negative image of Black men were especially common in the famous movie Birth of a Nation, which had such a large impact on American society that it caused the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the South. Movies that have been published in recent years, such as Django Unchained, do highlight the negative stereotypes that were held against African Americans before the Civil War. And the movie even delves into themes of eugenics during Calvin Candy's Three Dimples scene. The psychological consequences have helped curate these negative social constructs that are still held today. And the way we can prevent these constructs from being constructed in the future is by understanding how these biases hurt communities in general.
So this slide is about the eugenics movement. We define eugenics as a faulty theory of racial improvement and selective breeding. In the 19th century, Charles Darwin explained that species evolve over time through natural selection, and only some types are able to survive. Francis Galton then applied this idea to humans using the theory of survival of the fittest to categorize and rank racial groups. Other scientists like Petrus Camper justified scientific racism through false assumptions. For example, when he compared temperatures of skulls to deduce that Africans were most removed from the classical sense of beauty.
So the eugenics movement achieved its greatest success during the early 20th century, once it was discovered that its biased applications of intelligence to race science could provide conservative politicians with a robust scientific basis to their racial policies and thus replace the need for social welfare.
With the eugenics movement came a concern regarding its moral and ethical implications. Sorry, could you go to the next slide? All right, sorry about that. So with the eugenics movement came a concern regarding its moral and ethical implications. Ethically, inequalities may arise among those who received and do not receive genetic engineering. And morally, it's difficult to determine if it's acceptable to erase the part of someone's genetic heritage, possibly breaking genetic connections between a parent and their child. These are just some perspectives to consider, making the eugenics movement a continuous moral dilemma.
So today, when we talk about structural inequalities and privilege, we can see the eugenics movement was a result of an actual direct result. And basically merely ostracizing a race and depriving them of their inalienable rights. You can see that with the movie presentations we did. This positive shift, as eugenics has shifted connotations, refers to the efforts aimed at ethically increasing desirable traits with the motive to make someone's life more advantageous, while negative eugenics of the past refers to efforts aimed at unethically decreasing undesirable traits, which can be related to race, class, gender, etc.
So this is Kayla's slide, but she's not here, so I'm going to be saying it for her. And it's on systemic racism in the criminal justice system. A 2020 ACLU report found that even in the era of marijuana reform, Black people are more than 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana offenses than whites. And the 2018 study of swamp developments in Maryland found that such deployments were more heavily concentrated in minority neighborhoods, even after adjusting for crime rates. More raids were done with the excuse of prosecuting low-level drug operations. These are also some of the percentages of how many Black people are accused and a part of different sentencing over those who are white.
Due to systemic racism, many Black, Latinx, and other minority groups are subject to racial inequalities regarding their treatment in hospital systems and healthcare. Because these minority groups are not as likely to have private healthcare coverage, they are less likely to receive preventative health services. They are also more likely to receive lower quality care when it is available.
Symptoms for different conditions can vary from race to race. For example, Black people are more likely to have acute symptoms. Black people are at risk for heart diseases like GHD, but when they present symptoms like chest pain, GHD is not suspected due to the variation in symptoms between races. Black people also don't receive as thorough testing as white people and are therefore less likely to get cardiac intervention.
So, although the founding fathers of America once declared all men are created equal, federal laws ultimately favored slaveholders' property rights. In the early 1890s, Jim Crow laws enforced segregation in the southern states. Further acts of racial violence against African Americans, including terror lynching, were often financially motivated, and their horror intended to preserve the social order. Considering the influence of the past history, anti-Black stereotypes have become deeply established in both the collective and individual psyche.
Moving on to the legacy of slavery, here's a timeline shown in the picture, and some questions we focus on answering is how does slavery affect the minds of older generations? How is it perpetuated in the criminal justice prison system? And what can we do to prevent these ideas? Next slide, please.
So that was a lot to take in. So I thought it would be nice if we sum up some of the main points we learned through all like the discussions, movies, and readings. So first we have race science, which is basically the scientific reasoning why racism exists. And it's the idea that different races live separate and unequal lives. And there's been many theories from philosophers and other people who dive into this controversial topic. Implicit bias is when we categorize and sometimes judge each other based on the color of our skin. And this has been an issue since the beginning of time. Yes.
The eugenics movement was a result of society's implicit biases along with the scientific categorization of race. Today, there are two examples of eugenics, one being the action of ethically increasing desirable traits within humans, while the other one refers to unethically decreasing undesirable traits within race, gender, and culture. The systemic racism basically states that after the Jim Crow laws that enforced segregation in the southern states, individuals of color were very divided in society. Further acts of racial violence against these colored individuals were both financially motivated and were thought to preserve social order. Many who carried out these actions went unpunished despite being identified as killers. So therefore, these actions instilled anti-Black stereotypes within both the social and individual psyche over the course of history.
And why is what we learned important? One of the main reasons is so we can have a shift towards equality in society. Together, we've learned about it, and so we can help educate others in order to combat the inequality and support movements like BLM or Stop Asian Hate, and just start a change where children are able to grow up with equal opportunity that isn't dependent on the color of their skins.
And last but not least, spreading awareness. So it's important to learn about racism and inequalities all around the world so we can stay aware of the issues and seek for solutions. And also spreading awareness helps educate others so more can be done to reduce these biases and discrimination. And lastly, learning about the history of racism and discrimination allows us to have greater perspective on why things are the way they are and what changes need to be done.
And that is all we had.
Thank you very much. That was great. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you to all the students.
Yeah. Okay, let's do module 3. That is Ben.
That is me, yeah. So module 3 was titled The Deceptive Social Hologram. We were looking into 3 questions that, as we'll hear, we think are interrelated about the effects of believing in misinformation, politically charged misinformation at that, how to combat that, what strategies exist to combat the spread of misinformation, and also the effects of trust, interpersonal trust in particular, in combating online misinformation and its role in fortifying liberal democratic values. We made a short video. I feel like it's going to be a kind of very abrupt change of pace from the presentation so far. Been really comprehensive and very detailed. Ours is going to seem, by comparison, like we're trying to beat the clock or something. So hopefully it doesn't come across as like a complete, contrast, one that's sort of a jarring U-turn. So just give me one moment here. Okay. All right. And let me press that. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to, does this appear for everybody? Okay.
Yes.
Actually, only 1 second. Sorry. Let me just make sure, because I've messed this up before. There we go. I was about to not share sound. Okay. Everybody ready?
Good.
Let's hit it.
Our modules set out to address 3 interrelated questions of particular importance today: the rise of belief of politically charged misinformation, the potential impacts of such misinformation on those that believe it, and different strategies for promoting truthfulness and trust in the online spaces where most Americans acquire and discuss their factual beliefs about politics.
These questions are especially relevant today because a variety of studies have demonstrated how troubling a problem belief in misinformation and conspiracy theories are in a democratic society like the United States. Close to 40% of Americans have, according to one poll, inadvertently shared misinformation online. In addition, a 2018 academic study of how fake news spreads found that fake news stories elicited stronger emotional reactions from those responding to them and were far more likely to be shared or retweeted than genuine news stories were.
According to many theorists of liberalism, the rise of politically charged misinformation represents a kind of crisis for liberal democracies. Democracies need a common set of shared beliefs about what is true, and they are dependent
depend on interpersonal trust in experts, and trust in the rule of law and the democratic process. These are the exact things that many contemporary conspiracy theories, such as QAnon or COVID-19 skepticism, undermine. We wanted to see what the academic literature had to say about three separate questions. 1, what are the effects of believing in such misinformation and conspiracy theories? 2, what strategies are effective at correcting these beliefs? And 3, what effect might greater interpersonal trust have on the spread of these beliefs online? How can such trust be promoted?
So interns divided up to 3 groups and examined these questions by helping to create a meta-analysis or a study that combines the findings of an academic literature as a whole to examine a set of questions. The Effective Misinformation Group identified and analyzed more than 160 studies drawing on academic journals from social sciences to public health. These articles each, in their own way, spoke to what attitudes or traits of belief in misinformation or conspiracy theories are often connected with. For example, some studies look at the connections between the conspiracy belief and violent extremism, while others look at questions of individual efficacy or self-growth. The Combating Misinformation Group examined more than 120 studies, again drawn from a number of different academic disciplines, which look at different methods of combating belief in disinformation and conspiracy theories. We also spent time in our meeting discussing other larger scale strategies for reforming online institutions to dissuade people from being misled into believing fake news.
Finally, the trust group, by far the smallest of the 3 groups, were tasked with looking at studies encompassing 2 different facets of trust: how it can be promoted and what positive effects it has on strengthening liberal democratic values. This group looked at more than 100 studies on these different questions, providing us with a strong foundation for examining these questions in our eventual meta-analysis.
As the internship draws to a close, we are composing the first draft of our research paper. While we need to expand the number of studies we consider to complete the initial meta-analysis, we plan on coding and incorporating our initial findings to complement the more normative or philosophic arguments that the paper will also pursue about the need for liberal democratic societies to take these 3 interrelated questions seriously.
I really enjoyed our group discussions. I felt that they were very enlightening and intellectually gratifying. I appreciated how I was able to hear the opinions of my peers and how they brought in their different experiences to contribute to kind of a holistic knowledge about this topic. In addition, I quite enjoyed doing the research and putting in the articles, as I was able to gain more experience looking at different ways to kind of extract information, and I was able to see so many different articles and kind of broaden my knowledge on this subject.
Hi, my name is Luke, and I was a part of Module 3, specifically studying about ways to combat misinformation, and I thought this internship has overall been a great experience. I've had an incredibly wonderful time reading through articles and processing them and learning just so much about the topic, and I'm really excited to see the way this paper turns out, and overall, it's just been a great experience.
In this program, I really enjoyed having the opportunity to work with others to build something meaningful. Group discussions were always enlightening, and I learned so much about the work that goes into building meta-analysis.
In this data-driven role, this Module 3 helped me to have a deeper understanding and the relationship of human reactions towards the effects of misinformation and these conspiracy theories. And I really enjoyed working with Ben and other students, as all the abstract discussions kind of helped me to broaden my perspective and challenge myself to have a deeper understanding in different sides of things. And it really allowed me to ask why part of each question, allowing me to kind of pressure myself to become one of those actors that kind of bring the changes as societies focus more and transition towards misinformation and these effects of conspiracy theories.
Oh, okay. That is what we have.
Really great.
Mm-hmm.
It was really good. I just want to remind everybody to write up these. We'll put each one up as a working paper, and put all the names of the people so that they can get it and they can put it down on their resume if they have it. So I think you all did a really great job. Okay, let's turn to Monica. I think you're next.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Monica DeRoche, and I had the pleasure of working on Module 4 this summer with one of my past interns, Janelle Zeitz, who is a rising sophomore at Georgetown University this fall. She was a member of my module 2 years ago and joined me to co-lead the module this summer. It was a fantastic experience. We did our work on trauma and resilience. All of the students worked in groups and prepared a white paper. And we will be uploading those to the Ethics Center Internship website, but they also prepared a short video describing their work, which included doing literature on trauma, toxic stress, and resilience. And then we also had a chance to do some data collection in the field on resilience scales and measuring that, and then assessing what it means to sort of collect data and the implications of such. So I will turn it over to Janelle now, who will go ahead and play those videos that she has put together for our module.
My name is Ellie Clark.
Hello, my name is Joe Song.
Hi, I'm Maria Sethi.
Hi, I'm Cooper Campbell, and we're Group 1 for Module 4 about trauma and resilience.
Yeah, so the first thing that we wanted to talk about was toxic stress and how it can lead to trauma. Toxic stress in society today has been shown a lot through things like social media, especially with the younger generation. Also, we wanted to talk about how one has to experience a form of trauma in order to develop resilience. And after surviving through something hard, it allows us to develop that resilience and learn how to recover quickly.
The second thing we learned about is if resilience is a trait or a process. We define resilience as the ability to bounce back from trauma. And collectively as a group, we found that resilience is not a personality trait, but a dynamic process that can vary in different contexts. Resilience can be learned and developed at any age based on reciprocal relationships between individuals and their environments.
We were able to measure resilience based on how well one can bounce back from stress and trauma. We were given the opportunity to identify and get an estimate of how resilient one is through a series of 12 questions regarding themselves. They were asked to give a score between 1 and 5, 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree. After answering all 12 questions, we are able to total up the score and determine where they lie on the resilience chart. A score from 0 to 37 determined that one had a developing level of resilience. A score from 38 to 43 had an established level of resilience. 44 to 48 had a strong level of resilience. And anywhere from 49 to 60 had an exceptional level of resilience.
As we collected our data, we found that the scores we hypothesized for the family, friends, and teachers we interviewed largely matched the scores they received. For example, those who have overcome personal tragedy and difficulty in their life had a strong or exceptional level of resilience. Because the scores were so accurate to our hypotheses, we feel that using the resilience skills on this questionnaire is a good way to judge one's true resilience. To conclude, throughout this module, we learned that toxic stress is one of many factors in creating trauma, which in return creates resilience as a response to that trauma. Resilience, defined as the ability to bounce back, is affected by several factors, such as background and life experiences. We also learned about sampling methods and ways to measure resilience, such as the questionnaire. We used a non-probable convenience sampling to collect our data and came to the conclusion that the scales of this questionnaire are a good way to measure one's resilience.
This is Module 4, Group 2 by Brandon Block, Kate Bashore, Naomi Gu, and Carolyn Liu. In the modern 21st century, our world has faced traumas both collectively, COVID-19, and individually, divorce, deaths, assaults, etc. Trauma can come from both physical and cultural things, and it can be a single event or multiple over time. While toxic stress, unlike positive/tolerable stress, is prolonged stress without any supportive figures in their lives. No matter what, trauma and stress will occur. However, the buffer that helps us continue pushing is called resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back and the ability to recover. So one of the main things that we spoke about in the past couple of weeks was whether or not resilience was a process or a trait. So resilience as a process is made through experiences, made through how people process situations, and it fluctuates based on the particulars of the situation. Meanwhile, resilience as a trait is something you are born with, genetic inheritability and genetic vulnerability, because people have different levels of resilience, and supposedly that doesn't change when it's a trait. So one of the main things we discussed about this was whether or not we bounce back. So before a traumatic experience, do we act the same after? Or are we different? Do we grow more or do we shrink? What's up with that? And now for the COVID-19 pandemic. So COVID affected a lot of people's perspectives on traumas and toxic stress. Of course, since before COVID, traumas were considered deaths, rapes, etc., things like that. But the pandemic really changed things as more and more people began to Google what the MH-PTSD test was. And as you can see, 40.9% of adults reported experiencing at least one adverse mental or behavioral health condition related to COVID-19 in June 2020.
Hi, my name is Melissa Yan, and I'm going to be an incoming senior. So our topic of our paper is trauma versus resilience. So what I think trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event such as accident, rape, or natural disaster. And those painful memories will affect our daily life very much and will lead us to be anxious and depressed.
Hi, I'm Lauren Caden. I'm an incoming junior, and one of the topics we talked about is what is resilience. Two of the main points that we talked about when dealing with resilience is if it's a trait or a process, and individual versus group resilience. Trauma can be a trait because it deals with your actions, behaviors, and emotions, but it could also be a process because it deals with how you overcome it and the process of it. With individual resilience, you're not influenced by others' actions, thoughts, or words, and group resilience gives you someone to lean on for support and help who may also be dealing with some of the same struggles as you. Resilience is about being adaptable and successfully adapting to challenging life experiences.
Hi, so I'm currently a sophomore at Tarboro Victoria High School, and our module is about trauma and trauma resilience and testing. And so what is trauma? Trauma is the ability to overcome difficulties in a stressful event. And we do trauma testing on a BRS scale, 1 to 5, 1 being least resilience and 5 being very resilient.
4, and my name is Ellie.
My name is Rena. And I'm Taylor. Our group paper focuses on the process of trauma and resilience, as well as our individual experiences with our data collection. This module taught us the basics of data collection and how to gather data from our individual samples.
Our data was a convenient sample and limited in number, so the trends we noticed are not representative of the total population, but these are aspects we thought were notable in our own data. I did a convenient sampling of my close friends and family members, and what I noticed was that the older the individual was, the higher resilience score they had, possibly suggesting that resilience is more of a process than a trait.
While collecting data, I decided to collect from people in my inner circle, which includes my family, boyfriend, and family doctor. All these people have undergone different forms of trauma. However, one specific trend that I noticed was that men tend to have higher resilience levels than women. I specifically interviewed one of my friends who had torn one of her ACLs playing soccer and made a full recovery. Then her first game back tore the other. Because of the trauma she experienced not being able to play for almost 2 years, I believed she would score poorly. However, she surprised me and had a high score of resilience. Collecting this data led us to further question whether resilience is a trait or a process.
Hi, my name is Sienna. I'm 16 and I'm from Stevenson Ranch, California.
Hi, my name is Chloe Park and I'm from Irvine.
Hi, my name is Ella Goldberg. I'm 17 years old and I live in Santa Monica, California.
Hi, my name is Madeline from Group 5.
Hello, my name is Alexia and I'm from Irvine.
I participated in UC Irvine's Summer Internship program in Ethics and Morality
because I was interested in learning more about human behavior.
I can get a deeper understanding of how people react to trauma.
To learn more about trauma and resilience and to also learn more about researching.
For our data collection project, we phoned in family and friends to ask them a series of questions to find out their resiliency score against a standardized scale.
So in our interviews with friends, family, and strangers, we asked for personal information, including age, gender, race, education, and occupation. And then following the survey, we asked for some optional information like sexuality, political affiliation, and relationship status.
We had 46 participants in total. We then used the results to look at all of the trends. We found
our mean to be 40.46 and our median to be 40 and our mode to be 36.
Based on our resilience study, we can infer that the older you are, the higher resiliency score you'll get, just based on all the experiences you've lived through. You can also infer that relationship status, race, and ethnicity do not play a role in resiliency.
As our group compared our data, we saw that many of our participants were of the same age. This created a lack of variety, making it harder to account to the general public. Therefore, when making inferences, it can lead to many inaccuracies.
If we determine that this method of sampling is only as honest as the participants are willing to be with themselves, and that the accuracy confirmed from the answers that we know about the participant is reliant on the trust between the participant and the researcher.
To make sure that our dataset is more reliable, we can start to incorporate people of various backgrounds to ensure different perspectives.
My favorite part about this project was the collaboration experience and learning about data collection.
I got to interact with many new students and strengthen my understanding of resiliency.
Being able to apply what I learned in real life to myself and the people around me.
because I've really learned a lot about what it means to truly be resilient and how I can find that in myself.
Hi, I'm Suzette.
My name's Mila.
My name is Brady.
And I'm Manpreet. We conducted research on resilience by looking at intergenerational trauma. We were able to analyze this data through the lens of gender and age.
So our first graph features the resiliency scores for our female candidates that we surveyed. As you can see, we got a wide range of ages. Some of the people we interviewed were Holocaust survivors and others were teenagers just entering the world and beginning to understand ideas of resiliency and experiencing trauma and analyzing what that means to them and adapting to it. We analyzed that same data and conducted the interviews for our male candidates, which can be seen by our second graph featured here. And below you can see what the different scores actually mean in terms of levels of resiliency.
My favorite part about the UCI internship was the resilience questionnaire. Through the questionnaire, I interviewed my different family members and my friends. I was able to learn a lot about them that I didn't know before.
My favorite part of UCI was the opportunity to explore some of my different interests, including Holocaust survivors, through the lens of trauma and resilience.
My favorite part about this was also the surveying process. I really got to connect with lots of different people that are close to me and see how I saw them being resilient in various examples. And a lot of times their scores reflected that. And it was really interesting to have people sort of have that self-knowledge of themselves and recognize their resiliency. I thought that was very powerful.
Thank you.
By the way, we have another special assistant, Alexis Kim, who's going off to Georgetown. So, Janella, you should get together with Alexis so you'll have at least a friend. So I hope you can hook up right to me and I will introduce you.
Oh, yeah, of course. I can show her all the ropes. I've already been on campus for a year, so
You've been there. Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I have to give you my daughter's name. She's going to GW this fall. So lots of people there.
Oh, exciting.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's go to Module 5. Oh, no, we already did Module 5. Let's go to Module 6. That is Monica again, right?
Yes, that's correct. So Professor Monroe and I hosted Module 6, which was titled, It's Hard to Hate Up Close. And this module focused on the neuroscience and policy of discrimination, prejudice, and us versus them thinking. So we watched several documentaries and we discussed what this looks like. Students had the opportunity to prepare group projects at the end, either evaluating one of the programs that we discussed in the module or presenting their own program that would target discrimination and prejudice. So some of the student groups chose one, some chose the latter, all produced a working paper, which we will be uploading. Absolutely fantastic work. And I will play a brief video now highlighting some of the students' reflections on the projects that they chose and what they did. But this was just absolutely fantastic. And we had just such a wonderful group presentation. So I'm going to share my screen and play that now.
Hello, we are Group 1 of Module 6 of the UCI Ethics Internship. I'm Elizabeth Odom, and in this video, we will be reviewing the director of the Norwegian Correctional Service Training System. Norway boasts the world's lowest recidivism rate, the rate at which criminals recommit crime. It stands at a jarring 20%. America's is 76.6%. This begs the question, how is it that Norway is so ahead? The answer lies in its humanitarian approach to imprisonment. In Norway, the Hammurabian code of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth is a relic of the past. Instead of focusing on retribution, the country prioritizes rehabilitation, and the surest way of achieving it is through humane treatment. As correctional officers are key parts in the rehabilitative machinery, they go through special training to sustain a prison environment on par with the Norwegian Ethics Code.
On the surface, its efficacy is beyond refute. Its main goal of subverting retributionist views on inmates is consistently achieved. This can be seen with the successful reintegration of prisoners into Norwegian society. However, ethical concerns arise as correctional officers are trained to kindly treat inmates who have committed mass murders, molested countless victims, and worse, with a kind of care that was never shown to their victims. Here's a brief overview of the program and how its focus on reducing stigma and creating amicable relationships between inmates and their guards play a large role in the effectiveness of the Norwegian prison system.
Norwegian Correctional Service Training System has a 2-year training program for correctional officers. The training is divided into a practical team in training prison and a series of semester that focus on ethic and prisoner training. As part of the recipe in creating the Norwegian prison environment, the correctional officers are taught to build positive relationship with inmates to lower hostility, increase compliance, and thus discourage the prisoners' recidivism. In addition to training officers for 2 years, the correctional program has an extensive screening process for new officers. Applying officers also have to go through tests, writing assignments, and interviews. And unlimited 200 candidates are choosing to be part of the program. The program includes 3 semesters and teaches courses such as ethics, morality, professionalism, and dynamic of power in prison.
These courses are supplemented by activities in the prison and lectures at universities. This program is designed to train officers to treat prisoners in accordance with the rehabilitative nature of the correctional facility in Norway. The KDI program has been seen to have great success, as Norway holds the title for the lowest recidivism rates in the world and serves to reduce the stigma and discrimination inmates face. However, it is by this very fact that ethical turmoil boils. In the face of public opinion, the program may promote too much leniency. Finding a right balance between rehabilitation and retribution whilst incurring the least collateral damage on the Norwegian recidivism rate is the recommendation that we make to Norway as well as other countries hoping to replicate the program. As a group, we agreed that we most enjoyed the different perspectives of our peers in the internship and were exposed to different materials that we otherwise wouldn't have had access to.
Hi, my name is Sophia San, and we are part of Module 6. It's hard to hate up close, us versus them thinking. And we analyzed the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment. We were introduced to this project the first week of class, and we were all really intrigued by how volatile people's behavior was depending on whether they were the superior or inferior group in the situation. The Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes experiment was a project created by Jane Elliott, a primary school teacher in a small white town in Iowa. To help them understand the effects of prejudice, Elliott split her class into 2 groups, the blue-eyed group and the brown-eyed group. She then used pseudoscience and subjective reasoning to oppress the blue-eyed children and favor the brown-eyed children. On the second day, she switched it and made the blue-eyed children the superior group. On each day, the superior children dominated the inferior group, acting derogatory and condescending towards the diminished and quieter inferior group. Friends on the playground and classroom were turned against each other because of their eye color. After the experiment ended, the children had learned lifelong lessons about discrimination and had higher empathy because they understood what it was like to be oppressed. However, this experiment was not without its faults.
Hi, my name is Jocelyn, and for the positive aspects of this program, the experiment portrayed discrimination in a simple but unique way, where the different prejudices based on blue versus brown eye colors shed light on the gravity of racial injustice. Jane Elliott was able to realistically depict the idea of prejudice in a different form based on the small minor characteristic of different eye colors, incorporating the lesson of racial injustice with real-life implications into a classroom. In particular, her role as the instigator involved the continual usage of one negative quality of a brown-eyed or blue-eyed person to label the entire group. This act highlights the foundation of what prejudice is, where oftentimes in society there's a tendency to judge or label others simply based on superficial differences shared between racial or ethnic groups. Her experiment left a lasting impression on how it feels to be on the receiving end of such discrimination, inspiring many of the same children years later to greater understand and internalize empathy.
My name is Justin Tam, and I focus on the negative aspects of this project. Despite having some positive benefits, the experiment still received backlash from participants and onlookers. The main reasons being that it was seen as unethical and it left psychological damage on participants. Children in Elliott's class with the superior eye color treated their counterparts extremely cruel, with it worsening each day, and Elliott would allow this behavior for the sake of keeping the experiment real. The students who didn't believe in her made-up stereotypes would be manipulated by Elliott into conforming to the vicious behavior. Even as adults, the students who participated could still vividly remember those brutal days. Other adult participants she tested on were interviewed, and she said that she had people leave crying and had manipulated us. Elliott's desire to recreate the harshness of discrimination caused the experiment to be taken too far, leaving her participants with psychological damage and trauma.
Hi, my name is Isha Nag, and I focused on the potential solution / alternative. So as Justin just talked about, this experiment can be unethical and cause psychological damage to young students learning about discrimination. So instead of teaching kids to put an end to discrimination by dividing them into even more groups and creating differences amongst them, why not teach them the same values in a more ethical approach? There's a lot of evidence which supports that cooperative learning by bringing different groups together to work on something can be highly effective in increasing perspective and empathy in students. The jigsaw classroom technique is one that supports all of that and consists of students of different genders, nationalities, classes, races, and abilities to work together on an academic project through purposeful grouping, as long as there's diversity in the classroom. Just like a jigsaw puzzle, each piece, being each student's part, is necessary for the full understanding of the project and result, meaning that each student is necessary, making this technique so successful. Although the Jane Elliott Blue-Eyed Brown-Eyed experiment teaches students about empathy to an extent, this program teaches children about both empathy and about how everyone in this world is valuable.
Our paper outlines an analysis of programs designed to eliminate us versus them ideologies. Our group consists of myself, Rachel Park,
Aman Kumar,
Abhi Arya,
Sophia Rowe,
Kate Kim.
In our group, we evaluated, critiqued, and compared Jane Elliott's Blue versus Brown Eyes experiment and PBS's Watch and Guide program about race and racism.
In this experiment, Elliott told her students that blue-eyed kids were inherently better than brown-eyed kids, and then noted the behavior that followed. It had particular strengths in its versatility and its demonstration of giving a personal and first-hand experience in prejudice.
PBS created a comprehensible program centering around race, using familiar characters and thoughtful lessons to help children understand racism and empathy. Although the PBS program is educational and informational, it does not have the same lasting impact as the classroom social experiment. It is also not as personal and can be inaccessible to people in certain parts of the world.
it is possible to create variations of each experiment for more inclusivity or new experiments entirely to appeal to other marginalized groups, as discussed in this paper.
In our paper, we evaluated the successes and limitations of the two programs. During the internship, we got the opportunity to have open and honest conversations with each other about racial discrimination, prejudice, and injustice. We learned about the history of discrimination and its effects on our country, and about different approaches to combating prejudice, like social experiments or educational programs.
Hello, we are Group 4 from Module 6, and my name is Mega.
I'm Kate.
I'm Cecil.
I'm Ajuni.
I'm Manasa.
I'm Skylar. And we created a new program titled Mom. We were inspired by the various films and documents we have watched throughout the module to create a program that works to spread awareness about various issues regarding discrimination and prejudice. Mom pairs up with a celebrity or influencer each month to spread awareness on an issue they are passionate about.
Our program title, Mom, stands for Matter of the Month. We often look up to our mothers and parents to be our role models and educate us. Similarly, our program aims to amplify female and gender nonconforming celebrities and influencers to be our own version of a mom as we educate the public on relevant and important issues.
They take these 4 weeks to educate their followers on the issue and ways to combat it, choosing how they would like to take steps to work against this matter, whether it be selling merchandise and donating the proceeds, signing petitions to help pass new legislation, or going out into the community to make an impact.
Eventually, the proceeds we receive from the 4-week campaign get donated to the intended organization. In doing this, we hope to tie our organization to other programs across the nation to educate us and act upon the targeted issue. Our program utilizes the power of social media consumption to take action and enable other organizations in effort to address the aforementioned matter. Led by moms, we ensure greater access to information and tools to take action.
We have a strict screening process for those who participate in the organization. We want to make sure that the celebrities and influencers involved are genuinely concerned with educating the public rather than capitalizing off an issue.
Here's an example of a potential partnership. One creator may choose to highlight the struggle and discrimination that trans and non-binary youth face by partnering with the Trevor Project. On Instagram stories, they could bring attention to stories from their followers, offer meet and greets where the proceeds get donated, or even set up a live stream to increase donations.
Addiction is a widely talked yet misunderstood topic of society. Nicotine is one of the most addictive and harmful substances found in tobacco products, including cigarettes and vape. In the more recent years, electronic cigarettes or vape have become immensely more popular among teenagers due to its pleasant scent and small size. To combat this situation, many ads shown on social media seek to educate people on the dangers of nicotine. In this paper, our objective is to analyze these ads and further discuss the pros and cons in both preventing and ending nicotine addiction.
So for our group's program proposal, we decided to examine 2 related programs, the Truth and the Real Cost programs, which teenagers may come across while casually scrolling through YouTube or other online sites. Now, these companies aim to combat the growing addiction of nicotine and usage of e-cigarettes among youth, specifically targeting ages 12 to 17, who are most at risk, and they do this by giving them facts about the industry and its products. Anti-nicotine ads involuntarily begin to create an us versus them situation, rather than fulfilling their purpose of education and exposure.
The Real Cost uses the internet in order to reach their target audience, teenagers. They attempt to grasp the attention of the viewer through exaggerated video skits. A prime example of this is Possessed by Nicotine. Although studies have proven the Real Cost videos to be effective in preventing vape usage in teens, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are helping teenage addicts quit vaping in a moral way. In fact, Possessed by Nicotine paints addicts as primal animalistic creatures who have little to no normal human traits. This could be particularly damaging to teenage addicts who are prone to low self-esteem, anxiety, and depression, all factors that could have contributed to their dependency on nicotine in the very first place. In addition, this scenario demonstrates us versus them thinking. The Real Cost strives to keep teenagers away from nicotine by using fear as their tactic. But in doing so, they're drawing a distinct line between nicotine addicts and the normal human population.
While this may be an effective prevention method, it singles out people who do vape and makes them feel ashamed.
In other words, don't vape because it'll turn normal people like us into people like them.
Mikhail Mirabella talks about how hard it is to actually quit nicotine in her YouTube video, 4 Months of Quitting Nicotine Documented.
The college student documented her journey in an unfiltered way and wasn't afraid to show her viewers all the ugly parts.
It was an extremely mentally and physically draining process that is not talked about enough in these advertisements.
We believe this is one of the reasons why the video blew up. It's raw, genuine, and touching.
The ads also failed to connect with teenagers, their main target audience. The advertisements are made by adults who may not know how to appeal to the youth. Thus, many of these ads are seen as distant from reality. A common idea is to place disturbing images of the effects of nicotine on nicotine-containing products. However, the issue is that not only can people ignore these images, but most companies would never agree to place such things on their products. To improve upon these ads, we can take certain steps. First is to allow teenagers to provide their feedback on anti-nicotine ads, making them more effective. Along with this, ads should be more emotionally provoking as they've been proven to work better than generic anti-nicotine advertisements.
Okay, that is the end of our presentation for Module 6. And yeah, the students had a lot to say, and they developed some really original, incredible programs, including some that also evaluated some of the programs already in existence. So just absolutely fantastic. Both of the modules I was able to work on, probably the best experience I've had working for the internship thus far. So thank you so much for allowing me to come back and work again. I've had such a great experience.
I was going to suggest that each of you might send, if you wanted to do a little longer, or a couple of them were a little rushed, maybe you can send those to me and I'll forward them to the person that's putting them together, and you can work out the time so it doesn't quite so quick. Okay. Okay, so Module 7, that is Andrada, right?
That is me. That is also Max Ramsch. Max, are you here? Can you say hi?
Hello.
Oh, Max is upside down or halfway. There you go. Great.
So Max, Hannah, and Easy, we were teaching this module together. It was, again, a wonderful experience. You know that young people have always been a major driver for political and social change. And I think in this module, we did exactly what we were supposed to do. And that is finding out what do young people care about, what rights do they care about, what kind of changes do they want to see in this world. And then we looked up to the future with hope, and we thought about how to translate this hope into reality. So together with Max, Hannah, and Easy, we guided our students to develop and disseminate their own surveys. And these were tailored to fit different areas of human rights. So we worked on political rights, civil rights, social rights, cultural rights, and I think two more, environmental rights. What you will see in the next presentation is the result of their hard work. And a big thank you to all the students in Module 7, and Max, Hannah, and Easy. You guys are amazing. Everybody has done just such an amazing job, and we are so proud of your accomplishments. So I'm going to play the movie we prepared for Module 7, and I hope this will work. Let's see. I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay, sorry about that. Let's see. Where's the Zoom? Okay, I am sharing my screen. And here it is. Hopefully it will work.
Human rights. Young people are often denied basic human and civil rights. For example, young people are severely restricted on freedom of speech, the right to work and earn money, the right to due process before being deprived of liberty or property, and equal legal protection, which protects elderlies from age discrimination, but not younger people. Despite these restrictions, us young people are trying to find a way to spread the truth because we care for our community and the people that we may reach if we take courage and speak up. In our module, we explore and discuss about the ways on how young people could get more involved in every aspect of the world, which they are often deprived of. The main theme of the human rights module is expanding our knowledge and actions on ways to improve the world around us.
So the first area was environmental rights, and our survey encompassed questions about environmental rights and people's knowledge about them. It received 31 responses, all of which were anonymous.
And part one included personal information, such as age, gender, sexuality, and political affiliation. And then part 2 includes causes of environmental crisis. Part 3 includes the effects of climate change, both personal and on this planet as a whole. And part 4 includes preventative measures and personal impact.
Since there were so many people who stated that they believed climate change existed, it is even more imperative that they gain more access to resources and information centers. As observed in our data, there was a multitude of individuals who believed in climate change but did not know what caused it, the subtopics of the phenomenon, or what solutions that are at play. Most of the participants believed that developed nations should aid developing nations with climate crises, so more should spread awareness about that cause. This piece of data was a positive trend that was discovered. Most individuals understood the lack of power less developed countries had over environmental crises and how they, although having the least contribution, were usually impacted the most by climate change.
The health effects are already apparent, and over time, everyone's health will be harmed. In addition, less than 20% of the participants were unaware of any, no matter how big or small, laws set into place by their country or other country around the world. As a result, this speaks to the lack of accessibility to such information.
Finally, we saw through our survey and extensive research on environmental rights that many people felt as though they did not have the power to make a positive impact on their environment. This leads us to believe that communities need awareness and education of these rights. This can be achieved through activities that show us many small efforts create large positive impacts.
The next area our module focused on was cultural rights, and these are the cultural rights survey results. When the topic of human rights comes up, cultural rights tend to be forgotten. The survey data showed that a majority of respondents had heard of cultural rights but were unaware of what they referred to. After being given a brief definition, participants easily thought of cultural rights issues. The vast majority were able to identify a current cultural rights infringement and defend their stance. These results clearly show how quickly people can learn and how easily cultural rights violations can be countered with knowledge. Obstacles of cultural rights. Cultural rights' largest hindrance is the lack of knowledge that is associated with them. Another one is fear. To combat both of these, we must spread awareness. Everybody must be taught to fight fear with knowledge. By spreading awareness about cultural rights infringements, we can end current ones and prevent others from happening.
The next section we focused on were economic rights. Why are they important? They ensure the motivation of young people to innovate and pursue careers in areas that we feel will benefit society, with the knowledge that our efforts will be rewarded. It's important to ensure society continues moving forwards because without guarantee that work is rewarded and protected, nothing would be accomplished.
Even in Western countries like the United States, economic equality is not always present. For example, the women's soccer team did not earn the same pay as their male counterparts despite winning multiple tournaments. After public outcry and protest, the soccer governing body agreed to pay the men and women equal amounts in May of this year.
Some ways to improve. The Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25 states that right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of each person and their family, including basic food, medical care, social services, and security in the event of unemployment or disability. Second is providing education to developing countries to ensure the future generation will have a better opportunities.
So what are some examples of economic rights? One of them is the right to fair pay and working conditions, and this is important because it causes societal harmony in which people will not dispute over unequal working conditions, but this is something that people should achieve. The second one would be the right to adequate food and education, and this one's important because all humans should have equal access to the basic necessities of life, such as food, water, and shelter. What do the young people think? So our survey, the middle column asked whether students found the economy to be fair, and more than 77% of students surveyed found it to be unfair, while most students found that the equal right to education was the most important part. So the responses fit into our predictions, as most students would value their access to education since they are students. However, we had to further research why they thought the economy was unfair, and we found that in our survey as well. Most students thought the minimum wage should be raised to you see here, $17 to $18, when it's actually still like $14 to $15 at most in California. So we found that since they're paid less than others, they found the economy unfair.
Civil rights. Many people understand civil rights to be the rights that humans are entitled to under the law. Ever since our nation granted citizens civil rights, women were often left with limited freedoms and their civil rights were ignored. Over time, women's rights have changed in a positive way because of how people have raised awareness around this issue. We compiled a survey with a series of questions that pertain to civil rights, mainly aiming towards women's rights.
As we received about 20 responses, each were anonymous. However, we did ask for age, gender, sexuality, political position, etc. We asked for individuals to rank on a scale of 1 to 5 for how important they believe some rights or situations were as a present human rights issue. This included the right to abortion, equal gender rights, or subjects such as gender pay gap and workplace discrimination.
As we started off by asking individuals taking the survey whether they thought human rights was
Abigail's internet's a little bit unstable. So we started off by asking individuals taking the survey whether they thought human rights were the same as civil rights, where 75% responded with yes, however, 25% responded with no. The question that left the highest amount of individuals responding with 5 was about equal racial rights. We also asked what they believed were what the most common civil rights violation were today, and the majority responded with racism/racial discrimination.
When it came down to a question talking about equal gender rights, 75% of our respondents believe that it is at a 5 for being a pressing human rights issue, while 15% put out of 4, 5% put out of 5, out of 3, and then 5% putting it out of 2. We ended our survey with asking individuals if they believe the overturn of Roe v. Wade would infringe women's rights to life, health, equality, and privacy.
While about 14 individuals said it would infringe the women's rights listed above, about 2 people believed it didn't, and some people did not respond.
Next, our module focused on political rights, and the responses to the political rights survey questions varied. While many questions had more unanimous responses, others had more divided data and opinions, as is the nature of perspectives on political rights as a whole. Next slide. These questions gauge participants' perspectives on democratic processes, important political issues, and perspectives on government policies. For example, questions range from asking about whether the government should have closer connections with Russia, or whether the government should regulate corporations more closely, or whether the right to vote should be more easily accessible for people in the general population. Next slide. Overall, the survey results showed that many people consume political information in the same way, but have different perspectives on these issues. Thus, political rights as a whole is a more controversial and divided subject that divides younger people even on important political issues regarding political rights.
Next, our module focused on social rights, and the main question that we focused on was how do young people view social rights and what shapes these views? The survey reached 30 people, with the majority living in Irvine, Laguna, Arceo, and Capistrano.
So from the results, we reviewed that the main demographic of ages who answered the survey were in between the ages of 15 to 21 years old, which addresses the main idea of social rights in young people. And we also observed that the majority of people who answered the survey identified as female and male, with their sexual orientations mainly being heterosexual and bisexual. Next slide.
How have different environments affected and supported respondents' views on gender and sexuality, and what are their personal experiences with it? When asked if they believe that family/household environments shape their perspective on gender and sexuality rights, the majority responded that it somewhat does.
When asked if they've observed discrimination based on gender and sexuality among people other than themselves, 70% of respondents answered yes. And also when asked if their schools actively include and support gender minorities, the majority of respondents answered yes or somewhat.
Using this information, we've concluded that the external environments, such as someone's school or home, can affect a young person's view on social rights and their own identity.
To conclude, human rights is a diverse and wide-ranging field. Many individuals have different perspectives and opinions on these matters. Nonetheless, it is interesting to hear the youth's perspectives. These ideas will guide society in the future as young people generally have more inclusive and progressive human rights views. This paves the way for a more inclusive society.
And that is our conclusion for Module 7.
Thank you. Very nice. I like it. What was the total N in your sample of your survey?
I think everybody has done. I'm trying to stop this and I can't. I don't know what happened to my screen.
It's not showing.
Yeah, I can't. Oh, okay. I think I stopped, right? I hope
yes.
So.
What was the total sample size?
So they each had their own sample. So we did not combine the results for everyone. That's a project for the future. We have different surveys with different sections. So the students doing political rights, they did their own survey with their own questions. And so the project for the future is to combine the surveys and disseminate it to a larger sample. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Very well done. Thank you, Hannah and Izzy and Max, for helping. I guess Module 8 also Andrada.
Yes, module number 8, it was about the war in Ukraine and the geopolitics of Cold War. It was very interesting. Like the other modules, I think there was a lot to take in because I felt like we have to establish the background. So we went back in time. We went as far back as the East Slavic world and then to the birth of these two nations. And then we traced the Ukrainian history and the Russian history throughout the Cold War and then the fall of the Iron Curtain. And then we posed some questions regarding the current war, and we discussed about ways to move forward. And again, I have a presentation that we put together, and I will play it. I just have to get to that presentation because I have 3 presentations and they're scattered all over my Google Drive. And then one, I could not lift it on my Google Drive. So I found it. I hope this is the right one because we filmed, we were trying to stay within the limits. Yep. One, we filmed it more than once. Okay, I am going to share my screen. Thank you to all the students who have done this work. This is the result of their work. And I think it's really amazing. So I'm going to play.
Module A, the Ukrainian crisis. Importance of Ukraine. Ukraine is in the middle of 2 great power rivalry. We can safely say it's modern-day Poland. After 31 years of gaining independence, Ukraine is under attack by Russians. With the help of worldwide aid, Ukraine has managed to keep Russians at bay. But many of his cities has been polarized, and 1/4 of his citizens are now refugees or has been displaced. It remains unclear if and how a diplomatic solution could emerge. In what ways can Ukrainians or NATO do to de-escalate the conflict? What can they at all?
Within this module, groups were split up and tasked to research specific questions pertaining to the politics of the war. Is there any potential for the United States and its partners to rethink their approaches to the region and chart a new path for peace? What is the humanitarian impact of the war? What defines moral courage? Does society or one's own moral compass? Can Putin and Zelensky both be morally courageous? And what are the ethical responsibilities of NATO and the international community? Does NATO and the international community have an ethical obligation to protect Ukraine, even though Ukraine is not a member?
Is there potential for the United States and its partners to rethink their approaches to the region and chart a new path for peace? The war in Ukraine has dragged on for months, killing tens of thousands of people. Russia is still refusing to give up, but does not gain any territories. Could the UN somehow change everything and stop the war? No, there is nothing that the UN could have done to stop Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The UN is already doing the best they could by sending military and financial sanctioning to Russia. Doing anything more will result in a world war. But as the war drags on longer, it will become much easier for peace talks to occur. Putin will realize that it's pointless to waste more resources and time trying to conquer all of Ukraine. So some solutions to the war right now is have Ukraine join NATO. The likelihood of this is a 1 and the effectiveness would also be a 1. If Ukraine joined NATO, then that means that World War III would happen. Putin would launch nukes because he knows that he cannot win against all of NATO. Sending weapon shipments and sanctions, the likelihood of that is 5 and the effectiveness is also a 5. Ukraine is a small nation that does not prioritize military power, so sending weapons could be very needed. Invade Russia, the likelihood would also be a 1 and the effectiveness would be a 1 also. It could be World War I all over again. Another solution is educate Ukrainian soldiers and pilots more on battlefield intelligence. The likelihood of this is a 5 and the effectiveness is a 5. The US needs to help support the defense abilities of NATO and countries and allies that directly border Ukraine. The likelihood of that is a 5 and the effectiveness is a 4. Meeting of world leaders to negotiate peace. The likelihood is a 2, the effectiveness is a 1. While there are many different strategies that the UN could make, not all are ideal choices. Sending UN troops to Ukraine would most definitely take back all the territories that were lost, but with that, the threat of nuclear war comes from Russia. Ultimately, the only path for peace would be patience. The war will slow down, and then Russia would be able to consider peace negotiations.
The Ukrainian humanitarian crisis. There are many local impacts of this crisis. First, civilian casualties and damages. There are over 11,000 civilian casualties in the country, around 5,000 killed and over 6,000 injured. And as of June 10th, the destruction and damaging of buildings and infrastructure caused by the war in Ukraine had reached about $103.9 billion. There are also many displaced persons and refugees throughout Ukraine. Over 7.7 million people are internally displaced as a result of the conflict. And spread of COVID and disease is very prominent throughout Ukraine. NCDs are the leading cause of death in Ukraine, and there are large shortages of medicines and medical supplies and aging equipment in Ukraine.
The crisis also threatened the health and safety of women and children. There is ton of reports of rape and cases of sexual violence. The increase of insecurity and instability of pregnancy and children. The spell of fear, anxiety, depression, grief, and even severe skills also increased the mental health issues in Ukraine.
There's a large global impact of the Ukrainian crisis. There's global trade insecurity, meaning that prices are at an all-time high. There's food stuck at Ukrainian ports, freight rate spikes, and trade route complications. There's also both national and international food shortages. More than 1/3 of Ukraine's population is food insecure. Ukraine and Russia are both agricultural production powerhouses. Soaring food prices means difficulty importing food for developing countries. Impact of Ukrainian refugees on neighboring countries. As of July 5th, more than 8.7 million refugees have crossed borders into neighboring countries since February 24th, according to UNHCR. Poland has seen almost 4.5 million border crossings from Ukrainians fleeing the war, and it's estimated that 600,000 people are hosted in private shelters by Polish citizens. According to the revised Ukraine situation, RRRP, 90% of refugees are women and children. Arriving in a foreign country with few assets and no social network risks dangers from human trafficking, exploitation, and sexual violence.
Moral courage is standing up for your ideals regardless of judgment or threats to reputation, and it deals with ethical dilemmas, which is situations where it's right versus right, but it can often lead to moral arrogance, which is the thought that your opinion rules over all.
A moral compass is the ability to judge what is right and what is wrong, which helps with decision making. There's also a difference between ethics versus morals, in which ethics involves expectation of good or bad by an outside group, while morals are one's individual beliefs of good or bad. As previously stated, morals are your own personal beliefs, while ethics are globally held beliefs. In order for Putin to be morally courageous, he needs to protect and promote his moral beliefs, but they don't need to be ethically correct. In an interview given on July 21st, 2017, Putin stated that his top personal moral belief is life itself, in which he defines it as a biological condition. The ability to simply live is Putin's highest moral value, and it is how he is able to twist the truth to justify his actions. If he believes that by fighting and bombing the Ukrainian people, he is giving them their best chances to exist, as he keeps preaching how Ukrainians are Russian and need to be under Russian rule, while also protecting Russia's borders from NATO, then morally he is able to justify his actions. Because Putin is fighting to enforce his morals and is showing moral strength in his refusal to surrender, he is morally courageous. However, by no means are his methods or beliefs ethical, and he is certainly not ethically correct.
Communitarianism is a political philosophy which dictates that individuals have a responsibility to their communities as their communities have shaped their identities. A prime example of a communitarian is Zelensky. Zelensky has continuously put his country first, even when facing danger to his own life. For example, Zelensky refused the US's offer to leave Ukraine, proclaiming, "I need ammunition, not a ride." Through his valiant efforts to fight for his country, Zelensky is a morally courageous individual. That is exactly why INC describes Zelensky as one whose, quote, focus on others over fear or ego is an example to leaders of all stripes everywhere.
Moving on to evaluating the two leaders, Zelensky's acting experience has been credited with his ability to connect powerfully with different audiences, using facts and emotions to build up support for the Ukrainian cause. A great quote by Zelensky is, "Jesters were allowed to tell the truth in ancient kingdoms, but Russia fears the truth. Comedy remains a powerful weapon because it is accessible." Moving on to Putin's approach, Putin teaches us that the international community is willing to allow geopolitical thuggery in exchange for short-term material gain, such as access to fossil fuels. Putin and Zelensky's approaches are far from the same, but that's the beauty of studying moral courage.
So for rebuilding Ukraine after the war is over, there are a few economic sectors they need to focus on. One of them is infrastructure, which should begin immediately after war. And Ukraine had most of the resources to do so internally. So they can begin right afterwards to rebuild the infrastructure and also to modernize it. And another sector is agriculture. And a crucial part of agriculture will be infrastructure for transportation, and modernized infrastructure will make agriculture even better. And agriculture was one of Ukraine's largest industries previously before the war. So they need to rebuild that and also modernize agriculture. And another one is information communication technology, which has great potential in Ukraine. And they've already demonstrated their potential for it by resisting several attempts from Moscow during the war. And what will reconstruction look like? So there will be fewer refugees as the war. Fewer refugees will return to Ukraine as the war drags on. So over 12 million have already left, and Ukraine was already suffering from population decline. And the reason fewer will return is because they'll build lives outside in other nations, and they won't want to lose that and come back. And reconstruction should start now. So large areas of the country are free from fighting or have little fighting. So those parts can be focused on right now. And also they should build temporary infrastructure to support the economy, especially agriculture. And they should start planning reconstruction and future growth so that once the war is over, they have a plan to rebuild everything, rebuild the government. And for financing, there should be an EU fund. There already is an EU fund for Ukraine reconstruction, and they could also use frozen Russian assets, and they could loan to Ukraine.
Now about NATO and the international community's responsibilities. For NATO, NATO's official responsibility is to protect their allies so they're unable to offer Ukraine direct protection under the potential of angering Putin and sparking a third nuclear world war. However, the allies are still supporting Ukraine to the greatest extent they can by providing weapons, financial support, and humanitarian relief.
And in terms of ethical responsibility, NATO should be partially held responsible for the death of the Ukrainians, as they are somewhat able to stop the conflict or at least deter it. And they should work through economic means such as sanctions to deter Russia, but military action should not be taken by the member states.
While military action might stop some forces, it would lead to an increased amount of deaths and damages.
What is the international community? The UN is one of the biggest international organizations and is made up of 193 member states. Its purpose is to protect human rights and is comprised of many different councils.
Due to these international commitments, such as R2P, Resolution 1975, and the UN Charter that establishes the duty to protect, the UN and international community have an ethical responsibility to protect the Ukrainian people.
So why are they responsible? R2P was adopted by the UN and allowed for intervention in areas where human rights are not being protected. The first pillar is about a state's responsibility to protect their own citizens. The second is about the international community's responsibility to help a state protect their citizens. And the third is about the international community's responsibility to protect populations when a state is failing. This, in addition to Resolution 1975, established precedent for military intervention when citizens are being endangered.
In conclusion, whilst the conflict is very unique in its own ways, there are many things that we can still take away. Similar to most geopolitical conflicts in the past, the countries involved are often involved in a power struggle where one country finds it as a means to benefit their own economy or gain more land. In the specific case of Ukraine, which very much resembles the takeover of Crimea in 2014, the Russians are attacking another country that was formerly a member of the Soviet Union. Like most international conflicts, the economies of countries not directly involved are also being significantly affected. Furthermore, neighboring countries such as Poland, Romania, and Slovakia are taking in a large influx of refugees. Economies of European countries, especially Germany, are also being significantly affected by the conflict and impose solutions by the international community.
And that is all we have.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Students obviously learned a lot about the Ukraine.
Yes, yeah. I did too, together with them.
Yeah, great. All right, we're going to turn to last but not least, Kian. Thank you for joining us, Kian. And let's hear what your group did.
Appreciate you all having me. So we went through my first time doing a module with this group. Ours focused on a crash course on memory studies, focusing on collective trauma, and the stories and narrativizations that appear around it. It was pretty literature heavy, and so the end product basically became a literature review on one of the different themes that the trauma presented. For more, I will go ahead and open it up to our students. So Melissa, Emma, and Caitlin are kind enough to help me out by presenting on the module so far. So I will give it to them, and three of you, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So the basic overview of our module is that we basically went over comparative studies of war, political revolution, and conflict in 4 major international regions, which we'll expand on throughout the presentation. These political regions were China, Grenada, Yugoslavia, and India. And we explored a lot of the key concepts and themes that we'll explicate on later in the presentation through a variety of different reading forms. And my personal favorite was a documentary that we watched, which even roamed into the area of sports, which was Once Brothers. And before we started our module, we really came in with 2 main questions. The first one being, is it possible to re-examine traumatic events without harming the individuals who went through these events? And this initial question was heavily contested, but it set forth the importance for re-examination of trauma and the importance of conducting safe and ethical interviews. Our second question was, what makes good writing? And also related to that, what makes compelling literature? And that really set the foundation for exploring social science research and how different styles of writing could unpack really important lessons and themes. I think we're good to go. Next slide. And so our first reading was David Scott's Omen of Adversity, which really analyzed the Granada Revolution. And there were many key themes that were related to this reading, one of them being justice. And so following the Granada Revolution, there was this idea of the Truth Commission. And it was very interesting because it reestablished my own hope for ethics and responsible government. Furthermore, we really analyzed key themes such as time, revenge, trauma, and memory. And it was really interesting to see how one catastrophic event could divide an entire country. And it was especially interesting to study such a small country that isn't really covered in our modern media cycle. And I think it was really interesting to see, it was a huge theme that there was a lack of hope for many of the youth in Grenada, even though the generational gap had eclipsed so much. And it really speaks to the generational trauma that shaped a lot of the literature that we would read. And I came out thinking that this specific reading had a lot of international applications, especially with ongoing wars, conflicts, and as stated before, the Ukraine conflict, and the importance of finding justice and holding our government structures more accountable. We're good to proceed.
So building on that, in week 2, we looked at generational memory and also traumas post-revolution. So because unfortunately, one of our classes landed on July 4th. We didn't get to talk about Haiti too much, but we did look at Emily Ng's A Time of Lost Gods. And so the key ideas was in Emily's book, she uses ethnography as her research method to investigate a rural Chinese village. And it's also called the Forgotten Land of the Interior, or also a ghost town. And the reason for that is because first, there's a significant brain drain in the region because a lot of the young people living there have moved out to bigger cities for more opportunities. And also another reason why it's more specifically called a ghost town is because that there's like a very increasing presence of people turning towards spirituality and also kind of showing psychotic or abnormal behaviors. And the reason for this is that post-destruction or after the Cultural Revolution, a lot of people, in order to recover, they kind of turned towards spiritual guidance. And this was a result of them experiencing something called cosmological disturbance. And then some of the other elders also were found to have mental health disorders. But the interesting thing about this is that in Emily's book, a lot of the people she interviewed demonstrated that they have a somewhat positive memory of the Mao era. And this can then further be explained by something that I guess you could summarize in one word which is dignity. So a lot of people from these rural regions who during the Cultural Revolution were very poor felt that they could relate to Mao, who was also someone who came from a very rural and poor background. And they felt that Mao gave them this dignity and this hope through the revolution. So this kind of shows how the memory of the revolution, how things unfolded, and the impact, how people remember it definitely differed from location to location and context to context. Mao was remembered quite differently from people living in rural and urban areas at the time and also abroad. So the revolution to some of these rural individuals, some of them still believe it has not yet ended, even though it began in the 50s. So these people definitely, while they live on with damages and trauma, they still live on with this hope that Mao gave them. And so the key themes that come from Emily's book is first memory. So there's a couple questions here of how the memory of events can be different than what had actually happened and also differ by an individual basis. So then we examine how people can have such different memories. And then also we look at when and how can memory become political and become controlled by. Right now, if we look at the Cultural Revolution, China likes to control how they teach it in the public school system. So that can definitely alter people's and further generations' memory of the event. And they might consider it more of a positive event. And that really transformed China to become the modern China. And so then we also look at time. So do transformative political events ever come to an end? And if individuals and communities still hold onto it. So in Emily's book, she definitely talks to a lot of people who still believe that the revolution is still happening and has yet to end. And then the third theme is trauma and healing. So what is communal, which is basically community, versus individual trauma. So the collective trauma versus person-to-person trauma, and also how they might go about coping with it. And so from our discussions as a module, we kind of had two main takeaways, but of course there were definitely more. But first we looked at Emily's work. So we would say that it's compelling for a couple reasons. So her field work, as she wrote this as an ethnography, definitely uses more personal narratives and interviews with the locals she meets from this area. She goes to different settings, so spiritual temples, on the train, in town, on the streets, so in the public, and also a psychiatric hospital. She interviews different individuals. And she also takes a commentary from a practicing doctor to kind of gauge professionally the rise in mental health issues of the region. And then another key takeaway is that community, even if they suffered and have been kind of sucked dry, both specifically economically, they may still end up having a positive memory of a traumatic event such as the Cultural Revolution because it gave them hope. They view it as a key transition period of China to modernizing, and China wouldn't be how, I guess, strong it is as if this never happened. So they themselves as peasants also found a relatability to Mao, and Mao gave them this, I guess, opportunity for themselves and also this new nation to self-determine, and just gave them I guess you could call it a false sense, but to them, very real idea of what opportunity and change might look like.
So in week 3, we continued to expand on these themes of memory and trauma. So the first part of the week focused on the wars in Yugoslavia, a series of conflicts mainly centered around ethnic identity. They created a legacy of trauma and violence, which our readings explored in depth. The first reading analyzed adolescent understandings of political violence, specifically of the Bosnia-Herzegovina War and how it related to their well-being. It argued that adolescents more involved in a search for meaning behind the conflict often had worsened well-being. The next 2 readings explored the effect of hegemonic national narratives on legislative policy and collective identities. They explained how much of the Balkans' violence was justified by narratives of historical victimization and self-defense, and argued that these hegemonic narratives could be used as a lens to understand the political choices that a country makes, such as refusing to condemn war crime fugitives. I enjoy these readings personally because they opened my eyes to the complex array of factors that affect legislative policy, which I had never previously considered. And it was also interesting to think about how victims of violence could also be perpetrators and how this distinction was almost always never represented in later memories of the event. Second slide. So the second part of the week focused on the South Asian partition. In the first reading, Varshini argued that communities which engage in continuous civic engagement, either in the form of everyday or associational interactions, are often better able to regulate ethnic conflict to prevent violence. The second reading focused on how memories of the partition were passed down to younger generations and emphasized how the story lost nuance and became more polarized with each subsequent generation. The final article examined the caste system in South Asia, specifically exploring how the BJP party was able to take advantage of low caste resentment to mobilize them to violence. Some of the interesting takeaways I got from these readings was that time may not heal all. In fact, it may even sometimes worsen existing conflicts. It was also interesting to play with the idea of how identities can be multifaceted and different parts of our identity can be activated in different situations.
Excellent. So this hopefully gave everyone a bit of a peek into some of the work that we all did. The main themes that I emphasized in the process was that each question has multiple and complex facets to it, and also that within that is the space for further research. Which arguments do you take as valid? Why do you take them as valid? And what makes pieces that are in dialogue with each other, how can you further that dialogue as yourself as a writer? The literature review, final assignments that many of the individuals took on being the way to kind of explore that in their own writing. Again, some of the themes that we covered were everything from narrativization from the state level and from local level on traumatic experiences, how those interact across generations, the themes of justice and reparation and healing. So what can be done to kind of close those wounds, if they can be closed at all, was also a question that came up. And then finally, the kind of relativization of trauma, because whose story how they're telling it, and what factors, identity factors or others that come in onto their memory really shape the way that those experiences are felt and then passed down across time. So closing, I will go ahead and let people go. That is our module here. So I appreciate you all for having me. This is my first time doing it. And for the students in here, I appreciate you all going ahead to share your findings and experiences. It was a complex topic and a lot of deep things, and you all handled it really well. Very impressed with everything that came out so far.
Yeah, I'm impressed with the quality of these presentations. They're all have been very, very, very distinguished and much beyond what one would ordinarily expect from a high school student. I wanted to mention to you, Kian, I don't know if you've seen a book by Ernestine Schlank. I think that's how you know it, about the different responses of the narratives about the Hitler and the Third Reich over different generations. You know that book? Yeah, it's a good one.
Thank you.
And I think you've read The Cellist of Sarajevo, I assume, if you're interested in great writing. Boy, I wish I could write like that. So, all right, well, thank you all so much.